both page of the printouts were page Tes Zion, second paragraph, line 5. We were talking about the advantage of Re'iyah versus Shmiya and Shmiya versus Re'iyah. That by seeing things, you could internalize it, but then what you're internalizing is only a lower level, like a Navi can only see a lower level, as opposed to Shmiya, the idea of hearing is like hearing is from afar. You don't have to be close by, and it's less tangible. But on the other hand, it doesn't make as strong as impression on you. It's not internalized as powerful, but you can hear and understand, like a Chacham can hear and understand higher levels that Ashbi and the Arizal understood in with their Shmiya, greater and higher levels than the Navi could, and the Moshe Rabbeinu even could understand and grasp, because they were internalizing. Then we spoke that the idea of the mezuzah, which is the idea of the ear has to do with the mezuzah. That's why the servant is bored in his ear when he doesn't have the idea of eved. When a person has the level of mezuzah, the level of eved, the level of the ear, meaning the level of shmiya in the way of kabbalas oil, because of kabbalas oil, the person becomes no metzias for themselves. They are completely one with the metzias of Hashem. Because they are entirely one with the metzias of Hashem, therefore they have both advantages of Riyah and Shmiya. On the one hand, because they're one with Hashem, it becomes theirs, it impresses them, it becomes internalized, it's something pnimi. On the other hand, they could tap into the highest, most levels. They can tap into Hashem's very essence because they don't have a separate identity. When is there the limitations of Elikus that it cannot come down and be internalized? That is when I and godliness are two separate things. But when you have the bittul of Kabbalah's oil, so then it is something that permeates me because I become one with the Eibishter. That's the true idea of Kili B'nai Yisrael Avodim. The true idea of Eved is that the Eved is one and completely with Hashem. And we connected this with the idea of the word mezuzah. But the word mezuzah has in it zu and zeh. Zu is the feminine, zeh is the masculine, which shows on the union between the feminine Klal Yisrael, am zu yotzartili, with the masculine zeh keli v'anveyu. When those are joined together, then you have the avoid of the Eved that's completely one, Kili B'nai Yisrael Avodim, the level of the ear, and so on. Then we also connected it with another idea of mezuzah, that it says mezuzah could be mezuzos could be divided into two words. Zaz mavis. Zaz mavis, we know the idea of death is something that indicates on bad, that the death cannot approach. Why is that so? Because when you have zu and zeh together, you have zu, which is the Jewish people, am zu yitzarti, and you have the level of zeh zeh keli v'anveyu. So then there is, and Hashem is Atma Veikum Hashem al Keichem Chaim Kulchem Hayoim, that Hashem is the source of all life and the essence of all life. So therefore, it's impossible to have something that's the opposite of life when you have the connection and complete identification with life itself. So now the Rebbe is going to elaborate further on the word zeh in this idea of mezuzah as a combination of zu and zeh. So again, line 5 on page Teszayin. Yes, lahaisif, we got to add the hine haloshin zeh kebetevis mezuzah moira al inyan hariyah. The word zeh that's in the word mezuzah indicates the idea of vision, of sight. The great lens the Maamar is talking about, that the level of Eved, the level of the ear, the level of Kabbalah's oil combines both advantages, seeing and hearing, like we've just mentioned. So now he brings in that Zeh has to do with this idea of sight. Maamar Rabbi Seinu Zal the Chazal say, every single one points with his finger and he says This is my Hashem, and I will glorify and beautify him. Chen Amar Rabbeinu Zal, and so too the Chazal say, also then in the future, lost love, Kol Echad Mare Betzboi V'Omer Zeh. This is very interesting because it's this is the end of Masechtas Tainus. In the same sugya where it talks about Tu B'Av, at the end of Masechtas Tainus, the Rebbe has a whole sikha. Maybe if we have time, I'll mention it. That the end of Masechtas Tainus, it says after the Mishnah Masechtas Tainus talks about that the young maidens are dancing in the vineyards and they are telling the Bachar Sana. So at the end of Masechtas Tainus, it speaks about that when Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to make a mochel at tzaddikim, a circle, a dance for tzaddikim, and all the tzaddikim are going to be in that dance. And Amich Kulam tzaddikim goes on all the Yidden, and everybody is going to point with their finger, Va'amar b'yom hahu, and on that day they will say, those that are in the circle, they're going to say, Hine Elokeinu zeh, this is our Hashem. Behold, this is our Hashem. Zeh havaya kilvinu loy. This is our Hashem that we hope in. Teipamim zeh. Twice the idea of zeh, which indicates that even more so, the zeh of the nature that you can point to it and it's revealed and it's open and it's clear, even more so than what it says only once by Zeh Keli Vanveyu, by the Kriyas Yamsuf, Mashiach comes, it'll be manifested in the most revealed way. Zeh Sham Rabbi Seinu Zal, this is what the Chazal say, Kol HaNavim Nisnabu B'Koi, Moisav Alei Moshe Shnisnabu B'Zeh. All the prophets, when they said Nevuah, they said, Koi Amar Hashem. So, like this, Hashem said. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, and Parshas Matis said, Zeh Hadover Asher Dibra Hashem. This is what Hashem spoke. Which means that there was a different way how Moshe Rabbeinu perceived Hashem versus the other Nevi'im. I know the fish in the force, Moshe because the prophecy of Moshe was in a luminous lens, meaning a clear glass. He saw the thing itself. It's the idea of seeing the very matter itself. As opposed to when you say Koi Amar Hashem, it means like this, similar to this. It's not this itself. That's why it says by all the other Nevi'im that they saw Baspaklaria She'enami, a non-luminous lens. They saw a reflection, they saw a revelation, they didn't see the thing itself. So now the Rebbe in the brackets is going to say, how do we fit this in? Well, what we spoke about before, earlier in the Maamar, we spoke about that since, even by Moshe Rabbeinu, it was still a level of Re'iyah, it was a level of vision. And since it's a level of sight can only perceive so high in Elikus. Therefore, it says, that you cannot see the pnimius, can only see the external. How does this fit in with this idea of Zeh? It says in the brackets on line 15, according to what was explained previously. Even concerning Moshe, it says, you will see my back. That by the levels that are beyond the level of Achorai, the levels that are higher than the back, he did have comprehension. Meaning as follows. We say, Chacham Adif Min Navi, that a sage, a wise person is greater than a prophet. Why? Because the Navi can only see to the external levels, but the Chacham, with his Chachma, can understand even higher. And that's why the Rashbi and the Arizal spoke about much, much higher levels. But that doesn't mean that the Navi is lacking Chachma. We're talking about his prophecy is not as great as Chachma. But since he was a prophet, that doesn't exclude the fact that he also had Chachma. So with his Chachma, he was able to receive higher. So the same thing is the level of the koi. The koi that we say other Nevi'im had koi and Moshe Rabbeinu had zeh, it doesn't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have koi for those levels that were beyond his being able to see in a way that will point with his finger and say zeh. So he says, that these higher levels that he had asagi in, that he comprehended it intellectually, the level of shmiyah from the word havana, and here the Rebbe answers a question that always bothered me. We make such a big deal, the Chazal makes such a big deal about what it says. All the Nevi'im use the term Koi. Koi Amar Hashem, like this is what Hashem said. He says the expression, Moshe Aleim Moshe, that Moshe added to them, and he said Zeh. But that was, I think, only one case that says Zeh Adavar Shedibur Hashem, maybe more than one case. But Moshe Rabbeinu was not exclusively using only Zeh. Moshe Rabbeinu also used the word Koi. How is it? Why is it? If he was Expaklari Meira, and therefore he was able to say Zeh because he was actually pointing to it and he had Riyas Hamahus, why do we find that sometimes he says Koi? So that's the answer based on what we said now. Because the higher levels, those levels that could not be perceived as Expaklari Meira in a way of Zeh, on those levels, he perceived it in a way of Koi. Let's see it in line 20. That's why by Moshe we find many prophecies that he prophesied with Koi. Like the expression of the Chachamim, Moisif Aleya Moshe Shnisnaba B'Koi. When it says that Moshe added, that means that he had also what they had, and he added. It's not that they said Koi and he only said Zeh. No, Moisif means he added, he also had the level of Zeh, but he had the level of Koi as well. That from this is indicated that also Moshe said the term Koi, boy, but it was added to him also the level Bezeh, that he also had the level of Zeh as well. So this is the point that he's saying over here concerning that Moshe Rabbeinu had also the Hasag as well. Top of page design, since the levels that are higher than the level of my back, he also had the level of Koi. In a Zoy and Zeh mezuzah, when you add up the numbers numerically, Misparam Chafhei. The numerical equivalent is Chafhei. Chafhei is Koi. Sheshayich l'bchinas Koi. Ukmevur v'l'kudei Torah pirish v'amartem Koi l'choi, like the Torah brings on the pasuk and explain what it says. You will say so to the one that is alive. To Rosh Hashanah b'chinas Zeh. Rosh Hashanah is the level of Zeh. It says Zeh hayom tchilas masech. This is the day of the beginning of your doing. We say this in the Rosh Hashanah davening. But b'chafei be'elul, the day when the world actually was created, the first day of creation, that was chafei. That's the level of b'chinas Koi, because the true revelation of godliness came about through Adam Harishon. Adam Harishon was the entire purpose of creation, and he would manifest the revelation of Hashem in a way of Zeh. So he says, the level of Koi has to do with the number Chafei, because the Alter Rebbe is saying in the Maamar over there that Rosh Hashanah is Zeh, Chafei El is B'chinas Koi. So we see that it's connected. The number 25 has to do with the 25 days. That Shemzeh Muvin B'chinas Koi Shayeches LeMispar Chafei has to do with the number of 25 Chafei Yomim. So therefore, once we know that the word Koi, we see from the Maamar Alter Rebbe, has to do with the number 25, as we see that there's idea of 25 days, So therefore, we could apply it also in our case, that when you have ze and zu, the number 25 has to do with kai. And then the Rebbe says, similar to this 25 years. So what's 25 years? 25 days, we're talking about the 25th day in El. What's the 25 years that he's bringing in over here? So in the footnote, he says an interesting thing, that the year Tafshin Chavtes, Chav of, this was a Maamar said, on Yud Ches Menachem, on the 18th of Av. 2 days later, on Chav Menachem Av, Tafshin Chavtes, would be 25 years since the passing of the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father passed away in 1944, Chav Tafshin Daled. So 25 years later was Tafshin Chavtes. So that's the footnote says, brings from the publisher, not something that Rebbe wrote. So he says Yom Lashana, like the expression in Chazal is a day per year. That we see the relationship of days per year, like we find in the negative, that the punishment for the Chet HaMeraglim was that they had to spend 40 years in the wilderness that correspond a year for every day that they were spying out the land of Eretz Yisrael. But we see the relationship in days and years that they correspond to each other. So we have the idea of Koi as connected with Chafei Yom, the 25th of El. So too we have the idea of Koi connected with the level of Chafei Shanim of 25 years. Anyway, the main thing is he wants to bring it back concerning Zu and Zeh. What's the Zu and Zeh of the mezuzah? Says line 8, to Mezem moving for this understood, Shagam Misper Chafei. Also the number 25, Misper Shein Teatev Zeh and Zoi. The number of the two words of Zeh and Zoi, Kasher and Bechinas Koi is connected with the level of Koi. So what's talking idea? Okay, fine and good. This is a lot of times the problem with gematrias. We find a very gishmaki gematria. Okay, so what? So you find this gematria. What's the significance? Recently I saw this in a Sikha the Rebbe. We always know how tzitzis is in a gematria of 613. But since it says Huksha Kal Torah Kululat film, and the Rebbe explains over there, brings maybe from the Tikkun Zohar, I don't remember right now, from a Kabbalah Sefer, that since the entire Torah was likened to film, we find the gematria of film also having to do with 613. Also, because you have the head film, you have a shin on the right, and you have a shin on the left. So you have that's 600, and that's 300 and 300, right? The head film has shins on both sides. So that's 300 and 300, that's 600. Then you have 4 batim, that's 604. I'm sorry. Then you have the 3 prongs of the shin, and then you have the 4 prongs of the shin. You have I forgot. It was in the Dvar Malchus last week. I'm gonna have to look again on that. Anyway, so you have also film as Begematria 613. But why? Because film. The point is, if you have a gematria, there has to be a meaning behind the gematria. So the Rebbe came up with gematria. Zu and Zeh is gematria 25. What's the connection with anything? Why should Zu and Zeh be gematria 25, which is the idea of Koi Omar Hashem? What's the significance of mezuzah being connected to Koi? That's what he said in line 8. From this understood that also the number 25, the 2 letters of Zeh and Zoi is connected with the level of Koi. What's the idea behind it? What's the message behind it? Through the hearing of mezuzah. There are ears that heard on Har Sinai that to me the Jewish children are servants, which we said that is the idea of the mezuzah, to teach us that, and someone that doesn't have it needs to have his ear bored by the mezuzah. In a gam habchinas hanailus shebehen loy shayim chinazev chinas. I'm sorry. Alagam in a gam habchinas hanailus shebehen loy shayim chinazev chinas koybel vad. Also, the most highest levels. That over there, Zeh is not applicable, only the level of Koi, like we said, even Moshe Rabbeinu perceived in a way of Koi, those levels that he couldn't perceive in the way of Zeh, those levels that were the panim of Hashem, that he could only perceive in a way of Koi. But when we have the level of Eved, when we have the level of the Oizen and the Mezuzah, which is the level of Eved, Nimshachas gam hem b'pnimiyas kanal dalet. So they also come down internalized, like we said before, in ois dalet. Any questions?
So Zeh always has to be in the line of sight, right?
Yeah, it's something that's envisioned. It's something that's seen. Correct. Oh, so I'm finding this over here. The numbers. Maybe I'll look at Zoom where the numbers are. So we have 3 heads and 4 heads. So you have 613. So 3 and 4 are 7. Missed it. Anyway, further in the Maamar, line 15 on page Yud Zayin. Becharich is mitzvah mezuzah, parshas Eikev kanalsiv based. According to this, we got to add in the connection with the mitzvah mezuzah, the parshas Eikev, like we said in noise base. You remember we mentioned that the Rebbe Marash said this Maamar on Chsaftam Mezuzah Bisecha V'Sharecha on parshas Eikev, the second parsha, the parsha of V'Hoyin Shemoya. Instead of saying this on the first parsha in Krishma, on Parshas V'Eschanan, where it also talks about the mitzvah mezuzah. So we explained that since the first Parsha Krishma is in Parshas V'Eschanan, it's about Re'iyah and Alakus, that Ebrod Nova Eretz Ha'aretz, that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to have the idea of Re'iyah, and he was pilot in a way of Makif, and by some people they had it for Pnimius. So Parshas V'Eschanan, the first Parsha of Krishma, is mainly about Re'iyah. The idea of the second Parsha of Krishma is Shmir. And therefore, the emphasis is that the Maamar that the Rebbe Marash is talking about it specifically in the second parsha of Krishma and Parshas Eikev. But now the Rebbe is going to bring out, in this regard, it's in a way like Chesaron. It's the lower level. It's the level of Shmiyah, not the level of Re'iyah and Parshas V'Eschanan. Here we're going to bring out the true idea of Eved and the true idea of Bittul. And the true connection with Hashem is when there's Kabbalah soil, that is Parshas Eikev. And that's why the Rebbe Marash explains this here. According to this, we could add and explain and the connection. In the mitzvah mezuzah, the Parshas Eikev, like we said before, in Ois Beis, the Kabbalah soil tishmon hu b'doides should be iksa the Mashiach Davke, the main avodah of accepting the yoke of heaven. The idea that you will listen, v'hoya eikev tishmon, is specifically ubedoides should be iksa the Mashiach Davke eikev. When do we have primarily the level of listening, Kabbalah's oil, Eved, that's specifically in the generations of the heels of Mashiach. In these generations, there's the power of self-sacrifice, the ultimate state of bittul, because we don't have the comprehension and the hearts that previous generations have. So all that we're serving Hashem with is in a total Mesiras Nefesh. This avodah reaches higher than the avodah in the early generations. Although the sages said, if the early generations are like malachim, so then we are like people. And if they are like people, so then we're even less than people. So seemingly, how can you say that our avodah reaches higher than the previous generations? Paul Malcolm, he says in line 23, still in all, avoid the Mesiras Nefesh Yibadaris Achreinim Dafke, the avoid of self-sacrifice, specifically in the latter generations, but to such a degree. Avoid the Mesiras Nefesh Yilamayla Yosef, Afchilim B'chinas Nevuas Moshe, and it's not that the avoid of self-sacrifice even higher than the Nevuah levels of the Nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu that said Nevuah with Zeh. As it's known, the explanation of the pasuk that says, Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person from every person upon the earth. His primary humility was because he saw the avodah of self-sacrifice, that the generation of the heels of Mashiach, and that was brought about an unbelievable humility. So even though Moshe Rabbeinu was the level of Zeh, but he still saw us as being higher because of our self-sacrifice. So he concludes, line 5, that's why it says you can write on the doorposts of your homes and your gates, the idea of mezuzah is the bittul. It's no way of listening like a servant listens to his master. Until he influences and affects all the matters and items and objects in his home and everything that he possesses. So in the general world that's called a home, like we said at the beginning of the Maamar, through the person having the level of Shemiah, the bittul of Kabbalah soil, he affects that everything should be bottled to the Eibishter. So then the protection for the Yid, which the mezuzah is to protect the Yid, comes all the way from the highest, most level, from the level of Anoichi. Like we said before, that's part of Anoichi. So it's coming from the level of Anoichi, that level do we have the bittul. So therefore, since to that level of the bittul, that's where the protection of mezuzah comes from. They have bittul through the bittul of the level of Kabbalah's oil. So then we grasp the level of Anoichi, because as we said before, when the person's in a total state of bittul to the Eibishter, so then he completely becomes one with Hashem. Therefore, through this we affect that the entire world becomes a home for the Eibishter. Okay, now, like we said before, this will be revealed when Mashiach comes. Then it will become revealed and descend down below the third base of Mikdash. All of Maamar concerning the third base of Mikdash, it says, the glory of this latter house will be greater than the first. That's explained, like we explained in the previous Maamar, the Maamar we learned last week. When it says that this latter house will be greater than the former house and the first house, even though, like the simple reading of the pasuk, it was the Nevuah, I think it was Zechariah, that was saying about the second base of Mikdash will be greater than the first base of Mikdash. The main intention is the third base of Mikdash, that it's going that the third base of Mikdash is called the latter base of Mikdash. It doesn't say the second base of Mikdash. It says the latter one, the last one, the final one, the third base of Mikdash is going to be greater than all. The true and complete redemption through Mashiach. In the Rambam, like the ruling of the Rambam, even the Mikdash from Kaima, he will build the base of Mikdash in its place. He will gather the scattered Yidden. He will lead us upright to our land. Any questions?